r/NoSleep. Posted by you/Lady of Hell. The Midnight Train Part 4, The Rotting Village. My name is Amy. I'm still trapped as a passenger on the midnight train, heading nowhere through a maddening abyss. The train has come to its first stop since I arrived and things only seem to get worse. If you have no idea what the midnight train is and how I got here, you should start with Part 1, Part 1. And if you missed the last update, check here, Part 3. Some of you were worried about Lily stealing my ticket, but please don't worry too much. The ticket is still in my phone case. My phone is always close to me and I check every hour or so if it is indeed still there. I'm really paranoid about this. Anyways, I told you last time that the train would reach a village and I would go out with Lily. Well, that's exactly what I did. And yes, it went about as great as you'd expect. I will split this story in two parts because a lot of stuff has happened since the last update and maybe you will hate me for the cliffhanger, but I'll post the second part tomorrow. It's just a bit too much for me to type out right now. But let's start at the beginning. I was standing in front of a door, waiting for Lily to meet me there, as I was approached by the detective. I had not expected him, but he was a nice surprise. Mostly because I had feared the man with the briefcase would talk to me again. "Hello, Mr. Detective," I greeted him with a smile. He glanced at me, then the door, then back to me again. "You're going outside, kid?" "Yeah. A friend asked me to." "This is not a place to make friends," he said and took a long drag of his cigarette. "She's fine," I reassured him. "I'm more worried about the place we're going to." "Good. You're more careful when you're afraid." I bit down on my lip. Hard. Hard enough to taste a little blood. The man with the briefcase said something similar. The detective raised an eyebrow. "You talked to him?" "Yesterday, yeah. He fed the train last night?" "I know. I actually saw the man when he was still alive. He was disrespectful to the man with the briefcase," I told him. The memory still sent a cold shiver down my spine. He took another drag of his cigarette. "I hope that teaches you a lesson, kid." I knew what he was saying. That the people around here were dangerous and that I shouldn't trust anybody. They could turn on me for one wrong word at the wrong time. "But I can trust you," I replied. "Because a piece of paper said so?" "A piece of paper that kept me alive until now." He actually smiled at that, but there was little joy in it. "Be careful, kid," he said. "Would be a pity if you died." He went away again and I had to wait for a few more minutes until Lily arrived. She had changed her sundress for black trousers, a white shirt and a green jacket. Her hair was tied to a ponytail. She looked hot. "And yes, I know you're most likely not interested in this details. Ready?" she asked me with a bright smile. "Yeah. Let's go." I pushed the button next to the door and as it opened, we stepped outside. I half expected to see the abyss again. The one I saw when I visited the Weeping Bride. But there was just a normal, overcast sky above us. The conductor was standing next to the door and I immediately turned to him because my rules told me to. "Mr. Conductor?" I asked. "Could you tell us about the laws of this town please?" "Of course, ma'am. Do not eat anything in the village. Do not touch the villagers. Bow before the queen, if you come across her." It was certainly less complicated than the rules for the midnight train, and yet I felt my stomach drop a little. This meant nothing good. I still managed to smile, thank him for the information and turn back to Lily, who had listened carefully. We were walking out of the train station and into the town while continuing our small talk from yesterday. She was still a pleasant company, but I couldn't manage to relax this time. There was something unsettling about the whole situation. I felt vulnerable out in the open like this. The air was hot and humid like it was running a fever. I wanted to turn around and go back inside the train, but Lily looked so happy to be outside and I didn't want to spoil her fun. Let's be honest. The train wasn't exactly safe either. We walked through the first streets and I realized how worn down the village looked. Like it had been abandoned a very long time ago and was rotting ever since. The houses were crumbling, the windows broken, the road was wet and muddy. For a moment I actually thought our visit here would be rather boring, since this was obviously a ghost town and the laws the conductor had mentioned were meant for a long-lost time when this place had still been populated. We all know that I was terribly wrong, don't we? Lily liked to stop at store windows and look inside, even though no store seemed to be open. The lightless displays creeped my out a little, but considering what I had seen in the past days, it wasn't that bad. We stopped at a bookstore and looked at the books whose pages were already warped by the humidity. The leather-bound covers were beautiful and I couldn't read the titles, whether because the water damage had obscured them too much or because they weren't written in a language I knew, I couldn't tell. For a moment I thought I'd lost Lily, but she had just wandered off into a back street to look into the window from another angle. We held hands after that, to not get separated in the foreign town. The bakery we reached after a while freaked me out more. There were cakes in the display, pastries and cookies, and all of them were rotten. Discolored and covered in black and white and green mold that made my skin crawl just by looking at it. "How long has this been rotting?" I asked Lily. "A few days?" she proposed. "It's humid here. Mold grows fast." She was probably right. The environment was perfect for mold to grow in. Not just on the food, but on the buildings too. "That's why we can't eat here," I said, maybe more to myself than to Lily. At this point I was dying for some real food, but seeing all the rotten things made forget my burning hunger for a while. I jumped as I suddenly saw movement inside the bakery. Until now I had assumed that the town was abandoned, but there was definitely something inside the shop. Something too large to be an animal. I pointed towards the thing to grab Lily's attention while I watched it intensely. It looked almost humanoid, but its movements were sluggish. It was hard to make out any details since there was no light source inside the shop, but the silhouette looked a bit like a skeleton covered in loose skin. It moved slowly and water dripped from the strangely shaped body. "What is this thing?" Lily whispered. "Don't want to find out," I replied, grabbed her hand again and pulled her away from the bakery. Whatever was in there, I didn't want it to see us. It could be entirely harmless I guess, but after everything I've seen on the train I considered it safer to assume the worst. We didn't run. Running would be conspicuous and the thing in the bakery hadn't seen us yet, so we walked down the street like nothing had happened. The wet road was slippery beneath our feet. We walked towards the center of the town. Lily was still smiling and immediately pulled me towards the next shop she spotted. She reminded me of a child in a toy shop. She pulled me to the next window and looked in awe at the display while I had to gather all my strength not to recoil at the sight. Aquariums. Lots of aquariums, stacked onto each other, covered in mold and grime and dirt. Now, I guess that needs some explanation. I do not like dirty aquariums. It's a weird phobia of mine, aquariums or maybe dirty bodies of water in general. Nothing too severe, I don't run away screaming or faint at the sight, but it makes my stomach drop. I suffer from nightmares sometimes, where I run through an abandoned aquarium, trapped in dark rooms with dim lights and rotting water, but the phobia is otherwise manageable. Not a disadvantage in any possible way. And yet, there I was, staring at something that usually only existed in my nightmares. Flickering lights illuminated algae-ridden water and the half-rotten corpses of small fish, floating back and forth and staring at me with their empty eyes. Mold was growing all over the lids of the glass boxes, wet and green and disgusting. I tried to look down at the road, but I always glanced up to take another look, as if I expected something about it to change. "This is incredible," Lily whispered. I felt a little sick. "Are you all right, Amy?" she asked, suddenly worried. I nodded. "Fine. I just liked the books better." The books had been beautiful. Maybe even these aquariums were beautiful, through someone else's eyes. I knew what she meant. There was a macabre beauty in destruction, in decay and remains. I saw it too. I just couldn't bring myself to see it here. Lily understood anyways and we turned to walk away, as we saw someone. A man. A living human being in this abandoned village. I had a bad feeling about this. The man approached us and he looked sick. Seriously sick. Pale and sweaty with a feverish look in his eyes and dark patches on his skin. "You," he hissed at us. "Are you infected?" Lily clutched onto my arm. "We are just visitors," I told the man. "Liars." His voice was hoarse. "You have the plague. You have it, I know it." "Sir, please. You seem to be ill," I told him. He actually looked like he shouldn't be able to walk anymore, considering his necrotic skin and emaciated body. Whatever disease he was suffering from, I was almost sure it was fatal. He looked down onto his arms that were covered in black patches as well. "You made me sick," he screamed at us. "This is your fault. You infected me, you rats." I'm not proud of this, but I froze entirely as he barged towards us. I was panicking, my mind was blank and I could do nothing but stare at the sick man as he got closer and closer, his face a grimace of anger. I didn't even raise my hands to defend myself. Just stood perfectly still, watching everything play out in what felt like slow motion. Lily was the one who reacted. She pulled me into one of the narrow side streets, dragged me along with her as she was heading somewhere away from the man. I stumbled behind her, trying to match her pace and almost losing my balance on the slippery road. We ran until my lungs stung and I could barely breathe, and I prayed that we were heading back to the train again because my legs were trembling. My knees were about to give in and I already expected the impact of me falling to the ground, but the adrenaline kept me on my feet. And then we stumbled into the center of the town. I have called a lot of things I'd seen up until now horrifying. What presented itself on the large town square definitely deserved to be called that, but there was also this macabre beauty that could not be overlooked. There was a throne made of flesh. Not corpses. At least there were no recognizable body parts, nothing I could call human and be certain about it. Just a mass of rotting flesh, red and sickly gray and partly covered in the same mold that seemed to cover the entire town. There was still fluid flowing out of it, making the cobblestones glisten in the dim light. And on the throne, there sat the queen. She was merely a skeleton, tightly covered with gray skin that wore the same black marks as the sick man's had. Black hair hung in long, greasy strands over her shoulders. Where there should have been eyes were empty sockets, her cheeks were hollow and her lips stained with blood. She wore a dress that must once have been white, but was stained in yellow and gray and black now and hung loosely from her body. Bony fingers gripped the flesh of the throne as she looked over her town. The townspeople stood around her. Or rather moved around her. Two perfect circles, an inner and an outer one, moving in perfect unison and without making any noise. I stood and watched in awe as the grotesque scene played out in front of my eyes until the queen suddenly moved. Not much, just her head jerking up and the empty eyes fixating onto Lily and me. She saw us. Bow to the queen. We dropped to our knees and I kept my head down, not daring to look. The air was hot, feverish, it stuck in my throat and the stench of rotting meat made me sick. From the corner of my eyes I saw the people approaching us, still moving in unison, circling around us now and getting closer. I was crying at this point, silently sobbing and letting my tears fall onto the floor. There was nothing I could do. Even if I decided to run now, the plagued people were too close, there was no space for me to pass by them and I couldn't risk touching them. The conductor had warned us. I was sure the reason was that we would get infected with this plague. The queen made a noise. Some sort of hollow laughter that echoed over the whole plaza and her people started to scream. They fell to their knees, raising their hands in the air and punching nothing as if to fight her voice. And she continued to laugh as they were whimpering in pain and even that they did in absolute unison. I have been frozen before. This time I wasn't. As they were paralyzed by their pain, I grabbed Lily's wrist, pulled her to her feet and ran. It didn't take long for her to catch up to my speed and we sprinted through the narrow streets towards the train station. I did not like the midnight train. But at that moment, I felt nothing but relief as I saw it waiting for us at the station, the conductor still standing beside the door. I was kind of scared that the conductor would ask us how the trip had been. While I could certainly manage a few pleasant half-lies about the train itself, I could not say anything remotely positive about that horror trip. But he just smiled at us, said welcome back, ma'am, and let us in. I had honestly not expected to be that happy seeing the old-fashioned carpet again. Well, that was certainly something, I said to Lily as the doors closed behind us. She flashed a bright smile and then she threw her arms around my neck and hugged me. That was awesome. I haven't felt that alive in months. Thank you, Amy, thank you so much. How could I be mad at her after that? You're welcome, I replied and hugged her too. But I think I'll skip the next trip. That's when she realized that all of this was new for me and she apologized and asked if I was alright, how bad it had been for me, if she could do anything to help me. I reassured her that I was fine and I'd get used to it. Nothing a few hours of sleep couldn't fix. I even managed to smile at her. We parted after that. I grabbed more crackers although I didn't feel like eating it all and then I went back to my compartment. I lay down for a while, maybe even slept a little bit and after a few hours, the nausea had faded enough to force a few crackers down my throat. Night fell and the train drove off again, continuing its journey into the unknown. I had just started to write this update for you guys as the door to my compartment was suddenly pushed open. I jumped to my feet, scared what might enter my compartment that late at night, and saw Lily. She was pale, obviously struggling to stay on her feet and a fever was burning behind her eyes. I touched one of them, she said before collapsing on the floor. Now this is the part where you hate me because I will end this post here. I'm sorry, but a lot of things happened after that. This post is already long and I'm very tired, so you'll get the second part tomorrow. Until then, stay away from abandoned towns. You don't know what made the people leave.